countries, we want to wish you a hearty Eastern Cape welcome. Namkelekile. Goeiemôre, julle is welkom. Die mense wat Afrikaans kan praat. Manithethe isiXhosa ni namkelekile. Yeah, I just don't know French. I don't know how do you put it in French, because I think a lot of our African countries are French, you know, and Portuguese. Okay, I'll make sure for the next Export Symposium CEO that we greet them in the natural language. So we need to go for some lessons in that. So first of all, it is our honor. It's the 5th annual Eastern Cape Export Symposium and exhibition. There's a wonderful exhibition downstairs. It started yesterday. For those who are joining us for the first time today, welcome once again. The Eastern Cape, we welcome the international trade partners, including our African neighbors, as well as our BRICS delegations from our various countries, as well as the many policymakers and speakers whose presence really adds depth to our engagements. The theme of this year's Export Symposium is Global Trade Development's Opportunity Knocks. And we were just chatting earlier on about how many opportunities actually exist. The Eastern Cape is the province of opportunity. And I think events like these seeks to exploit those opportunities and bring us together to see how can we make a significant difference and impact in our Eastern Cape economy. My name is Lizelle Maurice, and I am from the Boracay Chamber of Business, but I'm also your facilitator or program director for today. So please enjoy this day with us, take some notes, make connections, because that is what this day is all about, connecting with those that you don't normally interact with on a daily basis. The global trade is very dynamic, and this Export Symposium will seek to highlight recent trade disruptions and the opportunities these create in developing additional and diversified trade partnerships and supply lines. The Eastern Cape Export Symposium has 2 overarching objectives. So if you are here for the first time today, maybe you couldn't join yesterday, I'll just mention those 2 overarching objectives. And the first one is to showcase the Eastern Cape's capability, what we as a people and as a land and as a country and as a province are capable of, as well as our export-driven sectors towards the building of trade relationships. And the second is to equip our local exporters with resources to accelerate exports and to contribute to GDP as well as job growth. Central to both is an understanding and utilization of opportunities and pertinent trade agreements, including the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And I think His Excellency Wamkele Mene really stressed the importance yesterday of the Eastern Cape in developing a strategy around its place in the game-changing market, the African continent, which is represented by 1.3 billion people and a GDP of 3.4 or more than $3.4 trillion, which by the turn of the century is estimated to be at about 16.2 trillion rand. And how do we as the Eastern Cape fit into this, and how do we secure that growth in the auto and agricultural sectors, for example, which our province is very known for and very strong in at the moment. So just to recap on yesterday as well, I've already mentioned, and all our speakers, mentioned passionately how this symposium or Export Symposium will not be just another talk shop, but it is a call to action. Sorry. And a physical channel. I think I need some water there, Linda, sorry. When you cough like this in the Eastern Cape, and if the people that know isiXhosa, when you cough like this and something happens to you, they say, bayakleba. which means in English, they are gossiping about you. I do apologize about that. I'm sure that is when presenters on television take an ad break, when something like this happens. So, sorry about that. So this, as I was saying, this export symposium is not just another talk shop, and that is what our Premier mentioned, our executive mayor, our ministers that were in attendance. It is not just another talk shop, but it is a call to action for all of us, you know, to connect, to make sure we don't only make contacts, but to actually turn those contacts into contracts. And that is what we need to do. By 2035, Africa will require 5 million units of vehicles. That demand must be filled by the continent itself. And I think there's a push that this African continent, we haven't yet, and we were talking with the CEO of ELIDZ, Mr. Tembela there, that the African continent does not have a vehicle. You know, we haven't produced our own vehicle. We're importing, you know, we're importing and assembling, but we can't. You know, it's like your Tata was an Indian brand, or Mahindra is an Indian brand. There's no brand that we can say, this is an African brand. Maybe a bicycle. Where was the bicycle? Where was the bicycle produced? All over the place. But we need to really grow beyond that and really ensure that not only our province, but our continent becomes known for a particular brand. Some of the key questions that were raised yesterday was, how do we move the province to be a preferred trading partner? How do we create jobs on the back of exports? And given the vital importance of non-tariff trade barriers, how do we improve competitiveness by reducing costs of moving goods to and from the Eastern Cape with transport, logistics, port efficiency, road, and rail? So those are big topics. And the competitiveness of exporting business, the full supply chain, those are key to the export success of the Eastern Cape. Responsiveness to businesses, in particular investment entrants. How do we deal with, in particular, private capital as well? How do we create, as a province, that enabling environment for businesses to thrive, for small businesses to scale up and become the big exporters that we need? How do we create or manufacture our own automotive exports and the potential for battery manufacturing? How do we develop, as a province, biofibers value chain industry here in the Eastern Cape? I just want to mention, there was an extract from President Cyril Ramaphosa's speech last year or some time ago, when he mentioned the Eastern Cape as the province has been hard at work to improve efficiency at the ports. These are signs of the provincial government hard at work with Transnet to make the Eastern Cape an efficient and cost-effective place to do business and to support manufacturers to get their goods to market. The Eastern Cape has really shown significant potential as a destination for renewable energy, and, you know, various different commodities as well. Now, for today, our second day here at the Export Symposium, we're looking at various topics, facilitated discussions, the tightrope, war, politics, and trade. We have 2 workshops. After tea, 3 workshops, in fact, unpacking South Africa's trade agreements with the rest of the world, international banking finance, as well as just on export legalities and processes, avoiding costs and delay. So another very interesting, jam-packed day for us today. And to kick off the very first session, I'll join on stage with me our facilitator, Thando Mpulu, who is the General Manager, Buffalo City Metropolitan Municipality. Please join me on stage, sir. Then we'll be joined by Mr. Tembela Zweni, Chief Operations Officer for the East London Industrial Development Zone. Please join me on stage. And we will be joined as well by Ms. Asanda Kauka, who is the Business Development Executive Manager for Kucha Development Corporation, as well as Nozipho Boy, Regional Commercial Manager, Central Region for Transnet, or TNPA. And now from this, the discussion will be the Eastern Cape, the gateway to global markets. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me hand over to Mr. Thando Mpulu, who will take over and facilitate this session. Please give him another round of applause.
Thank you very much, Lizelle. Lizelle is the MD, the Managing Director for the Business Chamber here in the Border Kai. So thank you very much, Lizelle, for such a powerful introduction of this session today. As I was introduced, my name is Thando. My surname is Mpulu. I work for Buffalo City as a general manager in the economic development space. CEO of ECDC, senior officials of government, CEOs of various companies, chairpersons of boards, and delegates at large, be greeted this morning. I think maybe we should start by, clarifying a few issues, CEO, about these kind of events. I think part of what we should be thinking about going forward is how do we reconnect what we did last year compared to what we are planning to do, in future. Because these are annual events, it would be interesting maybe at some point we have a session where we share that based on what we discussed last year or based on the connections that happened last year, these are the new engagements that we have achieved. So that we can debunk this view, that this probably is a talk shop. Sometimes we even think that we might be talking amongst ourselves and we're not talking to the right people. But when we can showcase what we have achieved, it becomes very critical that these indeed are very useful events. So I just want to underscore that element. The second issue that I want to raise in line with the topic of today, especially our session, the gateway to global markets. Those who have done economics 101, you would have learned that, in fact, some of the infrastructure that has been built by the previous government and by the previous regimes were created basically to facilitate what is called capital flight. You build a harbor and there's no relationship between that harbor and the local economy. There is no relationship between the big infrastructure from ITZ or SEZs to relate over and above, the issue of employment. Employment is very important. There's no two ways about it. But do we really have serious global players amongst ourselves that we can point to? And these global players actually created through this infrastructure that we're talking about. So basically today's topic is to create an alignment, to say we have invested billions of rands in this kind of infrastructure. But what does that mean to us as Eastern Cape? Is there a relationship between what we have done in the two SEZs and what we have done through our harbor? I know there's a big debate now, CEO, about East London Harbour. There's been an argument for years that we should actually improve this harbour. But the question is there a business for that? Is there a business case for that? I think that debate is going on. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have the relevant people who can answer these questions that I've actually raised. We have the ITZ, East London ITZ, that is going to be able to tell us about what they have been doing in the past few years that they have been involved, and also what trade have they facilitated. I know Mr. Zweni and others have been taking delegations overseas, and they have been talking to people, and he will be sharing to us today about how has this infrastructure given yield to our economic positioning as Eastern Cape. Equally, Coca IDZ and also the harbors. And without wasting time, ladies and gentlemen, I will allow Mr. Zweni to talk to us about what are they doing at Island and IDZ and how is it relevant to position ourselves in the global economy. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mr. Zweni.
Thank you, Madam Director. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, CEO of ECDC, in the interest of time, all protocol observed. My name is Tembela Zweni. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for Island and IDZ. You might have seen in the program, it talks of Miss Ayanda Kamwana. I am replacing him, sorry. Well, these are pertinent questions, program directors, that you are asking. One, especially in our space where we, this whole debate about the port expansion, the strong business case, and so on and so forth. We were just chatting just before we started here. I was saying that sometimes you need to take political decisions on these things because they will not always be making good business sense at the beginning. But if a decision is made, something is done, then suddenly you have traction in terms of interest. But that's the debate for another time. Let me stick to what we're asked to talk about, us as Island and IDZ. I think that it's most appropriate that we participate here as the SEZ because we were created precisely to support export-oriented industries. And I think that we have been doing our work. We have been contributing to that. Currently, we have 41 companies in our platform. We have invested just over 8 billion. It's private sector money that has come in there. We have, in terms of the production, we've seen an increase. For instance, last year there was a 20% increase on the turnover from 3.5 to 4.5 billion. We saw also the increase of 27% on exports. I think it means it is working, but there is a worrying trend, though, I should say, because in the previous year, in the previous financial year, we were around 27% export increase, but this year we have come down to 20%. So it's something that we need to be looking at, so that we make sure that that trend doesn't develop. I think one of the other things, some of the things that I think they will work for us is to make sure that we not only depend on foreign direct investment, but also look at the local domestic investments. We support them. We support our local companies through innovation and development if we are to sustain the long-term trajectory of export contribution. And to that effect, we have developed what we call a science and technology park, where we churn out prototypes, we develop them, we commercialize them in a bid to try and create our own industries, our own sectors, to try and answer the question that we're posing, program director, that this reliance, yes, it's good to rely on foreign direct investment, but in the medium to long term, we need to develop our own industry so that we can be consistently and successfully export. More so that now, this Africa trade agreement that we have, it presents huge opportunities to develop our own industries. I think at this point, lastly, again, to show how province has been serious in this SEZs. In fact, the country currently we have 11 SEZs, 9 of which are operational. And for some time, Eastern Cape has been the only province that has been having 2 SZ, and I think both of them are the front runner in terms of the South African program. So that's how serious the province has taken this, and I think that we are contributing immensely to the export development of the province. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Zweni. Without wasting time, ladies and gentlemen, therefore, let me call upon Ms. Kawoka to talk to us about the similar programs that they are doing at IDZ. And maybe without pushing you, ma'am, it would also be nice if you could, if there is any presence of intra-Africa relationships that are happening in these institutions. I hope Mr. Zweni at some point will come back and talk to that as well.
I'm the Executive Manager for Business Development at the Kucha Development Corporation. We are the operator of the Special Economic Zone, which is about 9,000 hectares of land. And our mandate is really to champion socio-economic development within our region and ensuring that the region is able to attract foreign direct investments to come and establish within our region. But most importantly, I think as my colleague Mr. Zweni has said, that we are also driving industrialization wherein we want to ensure that there is inclusivity when it comes to growth, that we also focus on our domestic direct investments. Then I think on the topic that we are discussing, to say Eastern Cape as a gateway for global markets, Eastern Cape is greatly positioned in the south eastern coast, so which means that we've got access to both the Indian and the Atlantic Ocean. So it is on its own an opportunity that makes the province to be unique in terms of how we are able to import and export different commodities, having access to Asia, Europe, North, South America. So it does position us greatly. But maybe also to try and link it up with what Mr. Zweni has already said in relation to the work of the special economic zones. At Kucha, currently we've got about 59 operational investors. They have created about 9,600 jobs from when they started operating accumulative. That is now operational jobs. And then in construction, it's also about 9,000 jobs that have been created over time. Those investments, I think the total is about 11.8 billion rand. But I think what is important then for us, maybe in relation to this particular topic, is what we have been able to do as a special economic zone to ensure that we also do focus on local businesses, local entrepreneurs. Most importantly, Eastern Cape is big when it comes to agriculture. I mean, if we're looking at what gets produced by the agricultural sector, Eastern Cape is indeed a very big player there. If you're looking at the mohair that gets produced and exported within the country, Eastern Cape is quite big there, because about 15 million kilograms of wool per annum is produced within the Eastern Cape. Okay, mohair as well. Eastern Cape is very big in terms of mohair production, which then gets exported to countries like China, Italy, Brazil, as well. When it comes to the actual livestock, in terms of what gets exported within the country, Eastern Cape accounts for 38% of any agricultural products that gets exported. So, which means then as a special economic zone, if ever we are to really focus on driving the export market and ensuring that there is inclusivity. So which means where we need to focus is the sectors that are already thriving within the Eastern Cape, which is the core is agriculture. So we should then be able to assess the primary production, what happens to that primary production, does it remain within the country? What is the quality of that primary production that gets produced? How do we make sure that we can be able to support those farmers so that they can be able to improve the quality of what they produce for, to be good for export market? Just as a case study for Kucha, we have got an investor. Okay, the mic keeps going on and off, but I'm hoping that I'm audible. We have got an investor that has been with the Kucha Special Economic Zone now for over, I think it's about over 10 years. It's Kucha Dairy. Kucha Dairy were basically a consolidation of farmers that were within our area, Sundays River, Port Elizabeth and surroundings. And they had been selling their milk to a particular, I will not mention who, but to a particular dairy production, dairy production company, thank you. Yes, dairy production company. But the farmers were not quite, they believed that their milk is worth more than what they are currently selling it for. But secondly, they also did not just want to remain only in primary production, whereby they do farming, they milk, and then they sell. But they also wanted to be involved in the actual processing of their product, so that they can be able to determine, should it be milk, should it be other dairy-related products, should it be yogurt, should it be cheese? And the Kucha then Special Economic Zone managed to formulate a solution to enable those farmers to be able to process their own product. So since inception, they have managed to expand 4 times within the Special Economic Zone. There are products supplied within the South Africa, but also abroad. And in terms of what they are able to turn over, it's about, if I'm not making a mistake, it's about 2 billion rand per annum. And this started as just ordinary farmers, but now they are actually processing their own milk. They are processing their own product so that they determine where and how they should be sending it to the market. So I think this is the role that the special economic zones are truly supposed to be playing, to say, what are we able to produce within the country? But most importantly, how do we enable those that are producing so that we can be able to capacitate them to be able to take their product to the market, so that they can also determine the price at which they want to take their products to the market. Because in doing so, it means there will be sustainability as well, and there will be more commitment, because these will be companies that are based locally. So even in terms, I mean, even if there could be changes in the global markets, but they will be more committed to become resilient and ensuring that they continue operating. Thank you.
Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Round of applause. I think I'm also, moved by the fact that, you have shown us the case study. In my other life, where we used to interact with the SEZs, we were worried about them being just pure landlords, just to, offer the brick and mortar, and they have no business in terms of facilitating the economic development what is happening in those SSZs. And it's quite heartwarming to realize that you're not just only collecting rent, as sometimes often perceived, you are also actively involved in the economic development and facilitate such programs. I think that is actually great to hear. But after having done that, somebody must facilitate the movement of such products. And our harbors are well positioned to do that. Or I assume that they are well positioned to do that. But I think I will invite Mrs. Boyd to come forward and talk to us about how are they playing this role. What is the role of the harbor in ensuring that we are well positioned in the global economy? Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. As I've been introduced, my name is Nozi Boy. I handle commercial services for the Central Region Ports. As TNPA or as Transnet National Ports Authority, our role is to mainly facilitate trade in a least cost manner, and also ensuring that there is economic growth by us partnering with the different key developmental nodes that we have within the country, but I'll be specifically speaking to the Central Region Special Economic Zones, now known as the SSZs, previously IDZs. So in terms of TNPA, or in terms of ports, I'm sure the colleagues that interested in economics would know that in terms of, from a locational perspective, especially when you speak to the foreign direct investment and the attraction, the logistical chain of doing business is quite important. So that's where we come in as ports, in order to enhance the value proposition of the different locations that we operate in. Just as an example, in terms of the projects that we currently have within the ports that also supports the special economic zones, you'd look at the container terminal. Special economic zones are mainly meant for processing or the manufacturing sector, so they need to either transport the inputs that they utilize within that particular manufacturing via our container terminals or via our break bulk terminals or bulk terminals in some instances. And then in terms of the finished commodities also, they also need to transport those through our ports. So when investors do come, we need to work in a collaborative manner in order for us to formulate this competitive value proposition in terms of a location, not mainly looking at a specific company, but we work collaboratively thereof, because the questions that will be asked by that particular investor would be around how are you going to be able to move the commodity? Does the port have the capacity to move this particular commodity? Is this commodity even allowed within the ports? And also, what are your operational efficiencies within ports that tend to be also a deciding factor? Because I'm sure no investor would want to work with ports that are not performing well in terms of turning vessels around. So in terms of the sectors that we focus on in terms of the authority, and we play a landlord role, we focus on the liquid bulk sector. We have currently 2 liquid bulk tank farms or terminals within the Central Region ports, and that speaks to the Gately site that is currently located within the Port of East London. And you'd note the importance of the Gately site in terms of facilitating inland also trade, not only for special economic zones as well. So in that way, we support businesses within the special economic zones. And I think the colleagues that are from this particular area that are fully aware of what is happening within the Gately side would then ask, so when is Transnet now making the terminal operator agreements and the leases move from a current operation that is a month to month to a more permanent basis. And I think I should just note that as the authority, we are currently going through the promulgation process, because part of the parcels of the land that within the Gately site are not really owned by the TNPA, so we cannot really advertise land that is outside the port limits. So once that is finalized, we'll then go through a process of a Section 56 process, wherein we put the pockets of land in the market for us to get those interested parties that will then come and bid in that bid process for us to eventually appoint a terminal operator or terminal operators, depending on the model that we're going to be following thereof. For the Port of Port Elizabeth tank farm, we also have a tank farm in Port Elizabeth that has reached its design life. And part of the work that is currently taking place is in preparation of the move of the tank farm to the Port of Ngqura. So you would see that there are going to be some advertisements in terms of RFPs that speaks to that. And that really ensures that there is some synergy in our projects with special economic zones as well. And we are currently working on a project with the special economic zone that speaks to the move of black carbon from the port of Port Elizabeth to the Ngqura SZ, but as the Port Authority, we're therefore going to be providing in terms of the pipelines that will be facilitating trade in terms of the receiving of the black carbon commodity. We have also been working on a project that looks at ensuring that we improve the competitiveness of the region, and that is the PSP that speaks to getting a private company that is going to come and partner with our container terminal at the Port of Ngqura. That process is being completed. It's underway. So as you have noted, our operational efficiencies at the port have been quite, fluctuating, for lack of a better word. So the introduction of this particular private company is meant to bring the technological know-how and the improvement in the system, so that we can ensure that we improve those operational efficiencies and consequently also improve in terms of the value proposition of the ports that we have. We're also working on a project in terms of the automotive sector. I had the mention of the automotive sector by the facilitator. So in terms of the Port of Port Elizabeth, we're working at improving the capacity of the PE RoRo facility, and also improving the capacity of the Port of East London automotive. And in terms of the PE one, it's mainly linked to the move of the containers from the Port of PE to the Port of Ngqura in order to make way for more automotives, and also the move of the waterfront development that the Port of PE will be undertaking, and that speaks to what is currently contained within their Port Development Framework Plan, easily abbreviated as the PDFPs of the port. The Port of East London is also in the process of deepening the NBETH in order for us to allow for bigger vessel sizes, that then speaks to the draft or depth of that particular port, and we're hoping that that will actually improve the competitiveness of the port, and also assist in improving the competitiveness of the port, and also improving the volumes that go through that particular port. In terms of manganese, we're also going through the same process. We currently in the process of also getting a PSP that is also going to come and assist in improving the operational efficiencies, and also not only the operational efficiencies, but also the construction of the manganese terminal at the Port of Ngqura. This is in line with the Transnet segment strategy that speaks to the consolidation of all manganese at the Port of Ngqura. And currently we're looking at November 2028 to make that a reality for the province. So all in all, I think I've said quite a lot. As ports, we don't work independently because as ports, we only have a small amount of land within the ports that we term as prime land. So we mainly depend with the land that is available in the key developmental nodes and specifically on the special economic zones. They are the ones that have the land area to actually attract more investments, and our role as ports is to then move the commodities in an efficient and competitive manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Boy. Ladies and gentlemen, let me allow space for the delegates to interact with our panelists. I will then take questions for the panelists. I'll take maybe three first row, and then I will then take the second one, and then we'll conclude. I don't have much time, so I'm very sensitive to that. Can I just note the hands? I will say number one. Any other hand? Any other hand? Okay. Whilst we're still thinking about the kind of question we want to ask, let me give the gentleman to ask the question.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Osi. I love engaging, so yeah, please bear with me. My name is Osi. I'm a maritime lawyer, so I basically focus on the maritime industry. My sort of comment is for all Sisinozi. And I was actually having a chat with Mr. Mtembu, who's the port manager here at the East London Port yesterday. Like, if you look at the port of Mogadishu in Somalia, you could look at the port of Mombasa in Kenya, and you look at a number of other ports like the Maputo in Mozambique, you'll find that their ports are more people-centered. When you arrive at the ports, they accommodate tourists. When the tourists are arriving, there's vendors there that are selling fish. So I feel like the ports in general of South Africa, they're more focused on big business. They're more focused on the big stakeholders, but they're not really focused on the people, on the local vendors. So I was speaking, I was talking to him about this, that we should have, Transnet should have a more vigorous approach in making sure that they accommodate local vendors and the people that are supplying services within the country, within that particular province. So when tourists arrive, they have a chance in order for them to communicate with the local communities, and in order for them to buy the commodities or the things that the local people have to offer, whether it be your clothes, whether it be your ginger beer, whether it be stalls actually that are there for them to spend their money. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just to make sure that everybody answers this one. We know that our main issue today is to look at the exports. But of course, we can't run away from what the delegate was saying, the issue of the value chain. You know, maybe just for all the panelists, maybe they could also talk to us about what then becomes, you know, available in the value chain. You know, that's one thing that becomes a spin-off from any economy. So we'll keep that, but I'm just expanding your question so that everyone here has a right or a space to actually respond to that. Any other question? Oh yes, look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, in that order.
Hi, my name is Ted Keenan. I'm from the Daily Dispatch. My comment is that East London, the port, is ignored. All the development goes on in Gqeberha, and really nothing happens here. There have been promises for years about making the port deeper, making it wider. However, Mercedes-Benz is really well accommodated for, but very little else happens. Why is that?
Okay, that's the first question. Number 2.
Good morning. My name is Tobeka from AFASA, Farmers Association. Just a question to the lady with regard to the expansion of the port. We have just signed a deal to export live cattle to China. And that deal will require us to have a vessel that can accommodate about 120 animals in the vessel. But currently the port does not have a quay that is large enough for that. Is there any plans for expansion? Thank you.
Thank you. Number 3. The gentleman on my extreme left, yes. No, just before you, yeah.
Good morning to everybody. Thank you for this nice conversation. My name is Roberto Cecuti from the European Union, based in Pretoria. I was just actually wondering, I heard a lot about many export opportunities, but very little about the green hydrogen. I know that specifically in the Kucha port, a lot is going on. We know about the joint venture between the Linde Group and Hive. I even saw in Kucha what is happening. How much is this ingrained in the export strategy of the authorities in Eastern Cape, and what is really happening in on the ground? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Number 4, gentleman at the back.
Hi, my name is Jeff Muloi from Walter Sisulu University. I know this is centered towards the export trade and everything, but I represent the academia as well. And I'd like to know, because I mean, one of the biggest talks in the province is lack of opportunities for youngsters, and everything that is being done here is geared towards creating opportunities. Our universities, and I'm not just talking about mine, there are several institutions here in East London alone, and we have another one in Gqeberha, a few. Are they supporting what you are trying to do in terms of what we are teaching, in terms of all our focus in the lecture hall?
Thank you very much. A very, very important question. Number 5, the lady just on the 5th row.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm standing here, I'm coming from Dovi Peanuts Company. I'm really standing here supporting the first speaker in terms of exporting. You know, exporting starts with our local. I'm saying this with experience. I started my own business of Dovi Peanuts. I make natural butters. And I do local markets in PE. We go to Crossways. We go. You know, the customers we get are tourists who are coming from UK, Germany, USA. As I say now, even I have a private funder from USA. In terms of what he's saying, that's the way to start this export. Export starts by the loving our small product here, and as they go back, it's expansion of export already. That's the reason I had to support what he's saying.
No, fair enough, fair enough. In fact, at some point I discovered that there is also a lot of economic activities that are taking place during the transportation of those ships between one destination to another, because the amount of time that they spend on the sea requires a lot of investment that is taking place in those vessels. So there are a lot of spin-offs that actually comes with that, and I think somebody must facilitate that. Somebody must make people aware that there is also an economy going on during the movement of those vessels between one destination to another. Ladies and gentlemen, let me hand over to Mr. Zweni. You can pick up any one that you think is relevant to you, and then we can
All right, thank you, Chair. I think these are all important and pertinent questions. I will not necessarily go through them by order of them being asked. Firstly, I think there's a question around the support for young people. Yes, we are very much involved there. 1,870 beneficiaries have been trained in various skills interventions, and it's all young people. 523 SMMEs have been supported in our platform to try and support your local manufacturers. 18 prototypes have been developed and completed. As I was saying, that part of the solution long-term solution is to be innovative and develop our own grown industry. So the development of these prototypes are meant to handle that. Coming to your question, Chair, or I'm sorry, Program Director, on intra-Africa relationship. Not directly, I should confess, but the company that would have made a case study of which we nurtured from being just a small backyard dairy processing has now moved into our platform, and it has increased, and now they have started exporting into Africa. We are hoping that at the end of the day, there will be investments that come, as I was saying, that this 3.4 trillion rand market that has been created by this free trade area presents a huge opportunity for us to be used as a springboard to tap into that market. The other thing I forgot to answer, Program Director, was the question of whether, as we were created to support export-oriented industries, how far have we fared there? I'm happy to report that 69% of the production that is happening at Island and IDZ get exported. In fact, it's just worrying that because in the previous year it was around 70-something%, but now it's gone down. Hopefully it will pick up again. In terms of the value chain opportunities, yes, you were very much alive from that. We even did value chain studies, and we found that, for us to be able to embed the production and these multinationals that come into our platform, we have to encourage the backward linkages. To that extent, we've created what we called a manufacturing incubator, where we will be, in fact, as we speak, it's just that I can't disclose the details, but we're speaking to a local OEM that is going to be telling us which components can it allow that they get manufactured here in East London. Because currently you will find that the first-tier suppliers, for instance, they import all their components from elsewhere, but we are saying that we need to deepen the value chain. So what will happen is that once we find those, we've already signed the NDA. What we're going to do now is that as we get these components, then we will incubate them. We'll find local entrepreneurs that will then participate in this manufacturing incubator. As they become stronger, then we can hire them out of the facility so that they can be multinationals in their own right. In the agro space, we've done that. In the aquaculture, we almost in every sector that we are involved in, we've done an analysis of the value chain so that we can see where we can actually position ourselves. Green hydrogen, we are also involved there. In fact, only yesterday, there is a project that we were presenting to one of our board committees that will be presented next week. There's a company that is interested in setting up a green hydrogen operation. This was as a result of the study that we did in conjunction with the United Nations, where they were looking at us, assessing us in terms of what they call eco-industrial park concept, where we scored 80 out of 100. So for us to close that gap to 100, there were certain projects that we identified, and this is one of those. So it's a product of that. You will see us making a lot of inroads there. Then lastly, in terms of university support, yes, for instance, in our Science and Technology Park, we have adopted what is called, in that space, a multiple helix approach, where it's a combination of academia, business, government, and every relevant institution to try and, come up with the ideas of how we can innovate, how we can develop. So we are very much involved there, and the universities are assisting us. Thank you.
Okay, simply because most of the questions have been answered, maybe just briefly, because I want to be invited next year to be a facilitator again, so I don't want to mess with the time.
Okay, thank you. I'll start with the question for the Port of East London and the promises for the port not being met. I think over the years, I should say that the ports have evolved. Even the segmentation of ports just happened about a year or two ago. So we have a new model that have got a desired end state that looks at giving ports the attention that they require. And the East London ports has been identified as one of the distressed ports within the port system. So there is currently a growth plan or a growth path that is currently being monitored specifically for the Port of East London. So that speaks to making sure that the projects that are indicated within the growth plan are being implemented. So I can assure you that the projects at the Port of East London are being given the attention that they deserve, and also the port has been highlighted as one of the distressed ports within the port system. So the NBETH is currently being worked on, currently being tracked closely within TNPA, and we hope that that will actually take place soon. We're also working on making sure that the pockets of land that are within the Port of East London are filled in terms of the access capacity that we have. Last year we had advertised that old HFO site that covers a total extent of 22,700 square meters, but unfortunately that advert came back as a non-response. So we are going to approach the market again with maybe a different commodity, looking at the new thinking that the organization has in terms of that particular pocket of land. We're also looking at the dry docking and ship repair. We used to perform well as the port, but now we want to look at what went wrong and what we can maybe fix in order to make the port more competitive thereof. You spoke about green hydrogen as there's a port that is earmarked for green hydrogen for the Central Region ports, and that is the Port of Ngqura. Within the Port of Ngqura, we have about 120 hectares that is termed as the liquid bulk precinct, and that's where all liquid bulk commodities are going to be located. So we're currently working on the interests that we have received generally for green hydrogen, and that is going to be included within the liquid bulk capacity. And I spoke of the relocation of the PE tank farm from the Port of PE to the Port of Ngqura. So that particular project that is earmarked to be complete by November 2027 will also include green hydrogen thereof in terms of the scope of the liquid bulk commodities that will be there within the precinct. We also have other renewable energy projects that were advertised. We went out on a request for information for renewable energy within the ports. The responses came back, and we are currently working on those particular projects, and then you'll see them on the market. That speaks to solar, this also speaks to wind. We're also speaking on the water side, a desalination plant. So we are currently working on those particular projects. And for the Port of Ngqura, in terms of energy in general, we have 3 Section 79s that have been awarded by the Department of Transport that speaks to liquefied natural gas, that's LNG. So we're currently engaged in negotiations with those particular 3 companies, being Mlilo Total Kuha, Car Power Ship KPS, as well as Strategic Fuel Fund, that is SFF. In terms of universities, I think we do support in terms of the research part of universities, and specifically for the Nelson Mandela University, the development of their projects are always supported by the TNPA as well. So I think I have covered most of the questions and how ports can support in terms of the tourism sector. I think that's the move that ports have in terms of the development of waterfront developments within the ports. So we aiming that by the relocation of the PE tank farm to the port of Ngqura, we can then free up some space for the waterfront development that will also have an element of maritime education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This debate will continue during our tea time, and also, fortunately, we've got the MD from the chamber, so I think this debate will continue from that level as well. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Tanda. I'll definitely recommend you for next year as well, don't worry. Please, if you've just come in, welcome. Please ensure that your mobile is switched off or put on silent. We don't want any disturbances. Please also track, I should have actually mentioned that way in the beginning, track your exits to see, in case of an emergency as well. But please do ensure that your mobile is off or on silent, and if we can limit our movements when people are speaking. Thank you. I just want to mention, so thank you for that session, Tando and your team. Please give them another round of applause. I know that we are running slightly behind time, so we'll play catch up. But there is a workshop starting at 10 o'clock in one of the other venues. The first workshop is unpacking South African trade agreements with the rest of the world. So that's happening simultaneously as this particular room is on as well. So if you want to attend one of those workshops, the first one is happening at 10 o'clock, unpacking South Africa's trade agreements with the rest of the world. And the second one will start at 11, international banking finance. So if we can just quietly leave while our speakers here continue. Just on one of the questions, I don't know if that was answered, but a ship actually left our shores. Our harbor's actually become quite busy. 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, a ship left our shores. It's London Port with 3,000 cattle and 50,000 sheep destined for the UAE. So there's the port activity is really improved as well. If you're in East London, you would have seen some grain trucks as well moving. So a lot of grain coming from the Free State mainly. So I think we have a role to play in the Eastern Cape to ensure that commodities don't come or products don't come from outside of the province. We need to ensure that we maximize our land potential in the Eastern Cape. So we need to up that. I know that our grain elevator has been very busy as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to call up our next speaker. It's Dr. Tapelo Tselapedi. Is Dr. Tapelo Tselapedi here? Super. A lecturer and commentator for Rhodes University and the Tightrope War, Politics and Trade, Balancing Sensitive Political Agendas Between Russia, the US, Europe and China, and how that can boost South African exports. A slip-up will be tragic, and we will discuss all of that as well. So if you can, do you have a presentation, sir? Not, you'll just speak off the cuff. Please, I invite you to come forward and take us through that session. Thank you. Please give him another round of applause.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah, these lights are blinding me a little bit, but it's fine. So, ke Thapelo Tselapedi. I'm at Rhodes University, and I teach Third World Global South Politics. And, it's always a bit difficult when sort of we are, at least for some of us, we're in politics, and you come to these business congregations and the jargon is a little bit different, so one feels a little bit out of place trying to situate themselves. But I've been asked to speak on this matter of South Africa's position. I guess a non-alignment position in a changing world. Of course, in the context of the emerging multipolar world, as a move away from the unilateral US order. So please forgive me when the jargon is slightly sort of more political, but I will try and also meet you halfway with regards to some of the conversations. But I wanted to also say that it's quite interesting listening to the businesses that's going on, the agreements that are taking place with regards to economic development, both here in the province and nationally. And one gets a sense that outside of sort of media discourse around government and the state broadly, business seems to revolve around a different discourse, and I think there's a lot of benefits there, so that's quite nice to hear. And I think to that extent, there's a role for business to plug the gaps where government is not able to. But nevertheless, I've been asked to speak on this matter of non-alignment in a sense, and I thought perhaps, given my political training, one should be able to contextualize and historicize some of these debates. So I'm going to go into a little bit of a history lesson and then eventually come up to where we are now. So firstly, the issue of South Africa's position on non-alignment is not new. We had seen it around the 1950s, 1960s, in the moment of decolonization where African and Asian countries became independent. Under the ban of the Third World, it was around ensuring that developing countries are able to own their own resources, to be able to design both political and constitutional arrangements in their own politics that are suited to the demands of their society. So that was quite important. But of course, you will remember the turf between East and West predicated really on the US and Soviet Union at the time. And that bipolar world is what forced developing countries to adopt non-alignment. Non-alignment at the time did not mean that one should not engage, whether at the level of trade, investment, one should not engage with the US or Soviet Union, but that rather their engagement or trade should be based on the interests of the country concerned and their own development. And that no country should be forced to align themselves with either, at the time, around communism and capitalism or market-centered societies. So that's not new. You will also remember around the late 1990s, former President Thabo Mbeki was chairperson of the non-alignment movement. And during his time, there was also talk of creating a G7 of the Global South. So I think it's important first to historicize these conversations, so that when we talk about BRICS and South Africa's position, therefore, we have a better contextual position. We then move post-1989 at the end of the Cold War with the dominance of the United States unilateral power, but also consequently with the emergence of the Global South, which is quite different from the Third World. And the basis, of course, of the Third World is around how do we address issues of inequality that are brought around by market-centered societies. Should we allow market-centered societies to be the determiner of prices, goods, and services? In what way, to what extent, how do we regulate them? And I think those are the discussions sort of then. And in that context, post-1989, US unilateral power was based on what I think Susan Strange calls structural power. And I want to just talk about that a little bit because I think it has an impact in our understanding, one of China and BRICS, or rather specifically this turf war between the United States and China. Now, US power is predicated on 4 components of power: credit, the ability to disperse credit or finance around the world, both among Bretton Woods institutions and US banks. 2, its security ability or its military capability around the world, that it's able to put boots on the ground, whether in Western Europe, many parts of the Middle East, and on the continent. Given the budget that is given to the security cluster in the United States, far surpasses a combined budget of the Western Europe and many parts of the world as well. The third component is production. Whether you look at Apple moving with its value chain in Asia as well, and the dominance of US companies in different areas of the economy. So from a productive point of view, the United States has been quite powerful. Finally, knowledge. The United States dominates knowledge around what democracy is. What is liberal democracy? What is market-centered development? And in large part, they've been able to create this idea of the symbiotic relationship between liberal democracy and market-centered development. And I'm going to talk about that because China, in a sense, displaces this relationship. Now, part of the problem arose, at least for US unilateral power, on 2 issues, or 2 historical moments: the war on terror and the the 2008 credit crisis. Now, those 2 moments, at least when we look at BRICS, were moments that effectively called out the United States as the primary force of creating an unstable security around the world. That the United States is the force that creates this unstable security regime around the world. And there's a need to address, one, the weaponization of the US dollar. In terms of the sanctions, you would see, of course, there's been, to some extent, a backfiring of that on Russia with regards to the Russia-Ukraine war, the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia. I know there are delegates here from different countries, so please bear with me, perhaps in Europe and elsewhere. But it's important to understand that China, as it emerges, contests US power in a variety of ways. If we're going to go back to those 4 components of power that I talked about, contest it from a production point of view. It contests it from a credit point of view, because China is giving out quite a lot of credit to, especially if you look at Pakistan, on the continent, and other places as well. And seemingly, its engagement with credit is quite different from how US financial banks are giving that credit out. It wants to be the first country in which that repayment must be done, as opposed to making it equitable for all companies that have borrowed, example, to Pakistan. So there's a problem there, and China needs to be part of engagements around how do we secure credit, but what are the rules around credit, and especially non-payment of that. 2, we know that quite clearly China is also contesting the US on the issue of production. Production has shifted, of course, I know everybody would know this, from the United States to China, broadly Asia. And you would have heard Jake Sullivan, the US Security Advisor, a few months ago speak about the need to have a middle-class foreign policy of the United States. Effectively, in a sense, bring back industries and production from elsewhere around the world back into the United States. So obviously they're giving incentives with that, to that extent. Now, I think the biggest issue in terms of the contestation between China and the United States is issues around knowledge as well. That one does not necessarily have to be democratic in a particular form, because democracy has different components to it. It's not just about freedom of speech. You know, in some places they tend to overemphasize that. But this sort of dislocation that China has done between market-centered development and reordering of the state or polity, you don't have a symbiotic relationship between liberal democracy on the one hand and market-centered development. And I think you would find that discussion sort of resonates in the South African political circles, where you saw at one part, I think it was in KZN, where they talked about the need to move towards parliamentary democracy. So there is that debate. And in a sense, Chinese polity or political regime sort of justifies, at least on the continent, some of the state regimes, not always necessarily democratic. But what I'm really saying is that I think we need to be mindful or be careful of what I perceive at least to be a Western discourse, of this creation of binary between the US being democratic or the democratic West and the authoritarian China or authoritarian China. I think we must be quite careful of that, because there are, of course, cultural differences. So BRICS emerge, and BRICS emerges sort of in this sort of post-2008 credit crisis, post-war on terror, and it's understanding that the United States poses a risk for security around the world. I thought it is important to just perhaps first outline politically what BRICS may look like, and perhaps the debates that will be had next week around expansion of the BRICS. Look, I think it's important to first understand that these are regional powers with the spheres of influence: South Africa in Southern Africa, China in Asia, Brazil in Latin America, and so forth. And there's a need at that regional level to continue to play out, because each country must be able to be accountable to one another. Each country must be able to define the parameters of discussion and trade in their respective spheres of influence. So perhaps it may be worthwhile for participants at the BRICS Summit to look at the possibility of including one a Middle Eastern power and potentially a North African power, as opposed to creating what may possibly be a United Nations in a truncated form. So of course there is some level of cohesion, but there's quite a lot of contradictions within BRICS as well. We know that the border disputes between India and China, the relationship between India and the United States, the issues around the contestation of African markets among the BRIC countries themselves, which I think brings into question the issue of what does it practically mean when we talk about South Africa being a gateway to the continent? I think South African government needs to think a lot more clearer about what does it mean to be a gateway. Does it mean at the multilateral level you invite African states to come and participate at the BRICS level? At the bilateral level, do they form part of the negotiations for this and that issue? I think that must be made clear at the practical economic level. But let's come to South Africa and where Pretoria stands in the midst between the East and the West. And South Africa is an emerging state, but also South Africa is a swing state, we may call it, in the sense that its economy or political economy swings between a sort of developing and developed society. And to that extent, we must be happy that we were part of AGOA. AGOA was not necessarily for a country like us. It was more for countries that are sort of least developing or developing countries to that extent. But importantly, our trading with both the EU and North America is important because it allows us to also export manufactured goods, which brings into sharp focus part of the problem of trading with BRICS. One, the trade deficit there. Two, we're effectively also exporting raw goods. These are not manufactured or processed goods. So I think there's a need, obviously, for the South African government to skillfully dance around how do we ensure that even in our partnership with BRICS, we are still able to maintain economic relations with the traditional powers of the EU and the United States. Our automobile sector is quite important in this regard, of course, at least when it comes to sort of our manufacturing ability, export-wise. You guys have talked about it thoroughly. You would know more details than me here. So I think the South African government needs to be quite clear about its own economic diplomacy with regards to that. Make sure that the issues around trade deficit are resolved. Otherwise, the pundits would be quite correct that what is the benefit of South Africa's inclusion into BRICS? Beyond, of course, we know this, democratizing international governance through the UN Security Council. And of course, South Africa and more broadly BRICS has been quite central in ensuring that beyond the G7, the G20 is quite important as a space to facilitate conversations around climate change, around international political economy and so on. So there is a displacement in the sense around sort of traditional international power configured around the United States and Western Europe. Finally, perhaps I just wanted to say this, in some of my engagements with some of the people within BRICS and trying to flesh out this thing of South Africa being a gateway, what does that mean? When we are going to move towards this BRICS summit next week, how do we leverage the African market, whether through the free trade continental agreement? How do we leverage this African market to ensure that beyond just a bilateral agreement, say between Mozambique and China, Zambia and India, there's a possibility that at the regional level, we're able to cohere around a particular project that has an impact on 4 to 5 countries. In a sense, I think the engagements with BRICS should be able to enable South African government to say that, well, how do you engage with us in such a manner that we can, on the continent, increase intra-Africa trade, focus on the issues around infrastructure development. I think many of you may know, I've heard about it quite recently within the diplomatic circles and elsewhere, around this project of the INGA, which has been going on for years. And I think we must put it to bed as to how can we use projects like that that are able to propel intra-Africa engagements. But I'm going to leave it there. Again, thank you for the invite, and I'm happy to be part of the conversations here.
Before you run off, there is a roving mic. Does anyone want to pose a question? Are there any questions? There's one hand in front of me. There's second hand. Any other questions? Any other hands? Please introduce yourself first, and then you pose your question, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Should I stand up?
Yes, please.
Okay. Morning, everyone. My name is Shamiso Hladrayo, and I'm research manager at Brand South Africa. I just have a quick question in terms of, yes, we have a very ambitious vision for BRICS. We also have an equally ambitious vision for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Now, do the objectives that we aim to achieve with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, are they not in direct conflict with the BRICS ambitions? And the reason I say this is because obviously within the BRICS formation, we want to foster greater collaboration, and we want to use our collaboration to strengthen certain sectors within the countries, the BRICS countries. But also from an Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we want to put African interests first. Now, if the BRICS countries are looking to expand their footprint on the continent, doesn't that then directly, is that not a contradiction of sorts? And will we not find ourselves in a position where our regional interest must ultimately supersede our BRICS bloc interest? Thanks.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, again. Yes, thank you so much for your speech. It was very informative. Yes, the part that I wanted to touch on was that trade deficit issue that you mentioned, because you look at China. China has a GDP of $17.9 trillion. And you look at India, for instance, India is sitting at $3.3 trillion. And you look at Russia, Russia is sitting at $2.2 trillion. Looking at Brazil, Brazil sitting at $1.9 trillion, and then South Africa, we're sitting on $406 billion when you're looking at our GDP. So when you're looking at the balance of forces within the countries in BRICS, there's quite a vast margin between China and South Africa when it comes to the balance of powers. So now, when you're looking at that gap, what solutions would you think from the top of your head in order for us to sort of decrease that gap within the trade deficit and within the GDPs of these 5 countries to balance out the powers? Thank you, man.
Are there any other questions? There's one more. Thank you. And then you can take those 3.
All right.
Thank you. Hi, sir. My name is Tando Tolo from iClick IT. My question is around the electoral system, the proportional system. What's your comment on it? Because I know quite a number of people. I'm one of them. We are complaining about the electoral system that we have in South Africa, because what it rather does, it gives, as much as people, they say we put government into power. Yes, we get to do that after 5 years, and then we do that provincially. But the leaders, they tend to elect themselves. Like, for example, we didn't elect the certain president now was elected by the party within themselves, and then they take themselves into parliament. And then that gives us this, as much as we get this illusion that we do have the power as the people, but that power lies within the politician to put themselves into parliament. And then when we need to fire them, we can't fire them. And you look at the issue such as Zondo Commission thing that has been instated in terms of corruption and all those things that are hardly, and we don't see any work going forward in terms of, is there anybody who's been held accountable? Is there any arrest that has been made to make sure that those things, they don't continue? So I guess also, what do you think of that? Do you think we need to change and then adopt a new electoral system that can help us in making sure that politicians are held accountable? And then so that we can also end the entitlement when you go, for example, in states, department, you see this entitlement of people sitting there and know that nothing can happen to them. And another thing that I want to ask you, do you think the world is actually moving into technocrats? Technocrats by, if you look at the GAFA companies such as Google, Apple, Facebook, the power that they present, do you see power moving towards the corporations being the powerhouse in terms of as politics are concerned? Thank you.
One last one right at the back there from Dr. Aldred. And that will conclude this session. That will be the last question. Thank you.
Thank you, facilitator. I quite like this discussion. My name is Aldred. I'm the CEO for Takadu Development Agency. I think we find ourselves, Doc, in a space of what I call polynomics, right? Because we between politics and economics, and the world is guided by the binary of the two. What I would rather want to propose, in addition to what you say, is that there is no contradiction between the free trade and BRICS. I think it's continentally, it's important that we establish some kind of, and I would propose, last night I had the discussion, a currency that we may call an afro, that allows us as African countries to trade in the free trade agreement process, maybe on needs. What do we need on the continent, and how can we share that need and equalize that into a currency that equate, whether it devalues or increase the value of any currency, but make it zero, and it will appreciate but depreciate for others. And on that basis, then trade on need. But in the BRICS process, we trade on want, right? And I want to further posture that industrialization in Africa cannot happen if we keep exporting our raw products. So for industrialization to really take place, we need to take charge of manufacturing our own goods instead of exporting. And I think that's the opportunity that should possibly be discussed at a much broader level. So mine is just to pose that we can talk after this again, how do we leverage on such ideas? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the questions. I've been given 5 minutes sort of to, to settle them in a sense. First question is around, do the objectives of the Free Continental Trade Agreement, or are they in competition with BRICS? I think to some extent, yes. I think to some extent, yes. Hence, there's the discussion, I know, at that level around the issue of visas for business people on the continent to move freely and be able to see how they can do investments or trade in different areas on the continent. So I think that's quite important. And this is why I posed the question of then what do we practically mean when we say that South Africa is a gateway to the continent? It's as if we are giving the continent to the slaughterhouse, like a cow now is going to be butchered. And there's a need to manage, of course, this competition. I don't know how you do that, but I agree with the speaker around you have to have regional interests superseding BRICS competition. You need that. Otherwise, what is the point? Because then you can't have intra-Africa trade, especially on the issues of the logistics networks and infrastructure. You need that. How the maritime lawyer, forgetting the name, you spoke about trade deficit and how to decrease it. I don't know. Look, China is a huge economy, partly because of its numerical power. And South Africa does not have that. We are a small economy, at least financially. But I think, let me just say this about South Africa. I think, a large part of the analysis on South Africa's incorporation into BRICS centers around our economic power. It's not so huge, but South Africa's voice politically is quite important. And BRICS is not just around the economy, but it's how do you democratize international institutions. That's huge, and I think South Africa's voice is quite important around issues of conflict resolution, not only on this continent, but elsewhere, in the Middle East. Part of the reason why we did not move away from the issue of removing ourselves from the ICC and the Rome Statute is around securing also the interests of the Palestinian struggle. So I think we must not forget our voice there internationally, and perhaps to sort of narrow down the vision of BRICS only within the economy. I'm just trying to move fast. I think the last one was a comment, so I'm not going to respond to that, but I'm happy for the invite to have more discussions outside of this meeting. But Thando Xola, I hope I'm pronouncing you correctly. So, the electoral system. Look, you have two questions. Should we change the electoral system? I think it's hard because there's a bigger discussion, and I think it's precipitated by sort of China's political system. There's a bigger discussion about multi-party democracy. Does freedom of speech And all of this, I mean, I think what's quite important around democracy or multi-party democracy is the issues of voting, universal suffrage, and the issues around freedom of speech. I think that those have been quite central to our understanding of democracy. But I don't know to what extent that does yield one accountability and development. And there was one commentator who made an interesting observation between China and the United States, saying that this competition between the Democrats and the Republicans does not and has not historically yielded sort of democratic dividends or developmental dividends for citizens in the United States, in the sense that there has not been any measurable change in the United States for a long time. You will see that, of course, they're battling with issues around debt, and I'm coming to a close. Whereas in China, a single party has been able to lift millions of people out of poverty in the past 20 to 30 years. So we need to have that discussion around what does multi-party democracy do for us in terms of development. That's been a discussion since the 1980s. Are we moving towards corporations, sort of the dominance of tech companies? I don't know. It depends where you sort of hedge your future at. If you look at China again, and this is why I think they're quite important, you get a clear sense that the political elites have influence over corporate elites, unlike in the United States. Of course, I think the EU is quite a different market with regards to the political economy, but you don't want a situation where corporates determine and influence at a huge level your policy, whether domestically or foreign policy. You want a situation where political elites are able to drive development. That does not necessarily mean creating parastatals by driving development, but being able to understand what is the policy, how do we institute domestic policy, how do we make sure that in the South African context we break up these oligopolies. But let me leave it there. I'm under strict time, and perhaps those who want to have this conversation can have it after here. Thank you again.
What an interesting conversation. I do apologize for cutting it short, Dr. Tapelo, but I think definitely a topic that is worth continuing to engage. So please do engage with Dr. Tapelo during tea time, etc. And so now we're going to go on to our next session. We're about almost 10 minutes over the time for that session to start. I do want to remind you that at 11 o'clock, there will be a workshop downstairs on international banking finance. I do apologize. Earlier, we mentioned that the venues for the workshops is upstairs, but they are actually downstairs. So currently happening downstairs until 10:30 is unpacking South Africa trade agreements with the rest of the world. And then at 11 o'clock, we will have another session on international banking finance. But for now, we will be calling up our next panel discussion, that will be facilitated by Mr. Solomon Engelbrecht. Is he, Dr. Solomon, here? Mr. Solomon Engelbrecht? Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. He's the Deputy Director, Export Development at the DTIC, and he will take us through the resources available to stimulate exports and trade. Please have a seat, and then we will call up the panelists as well, and they are Mr. Corbin Thompson, a lead project manager, International Trade, Institute of Southern Africa, Ms. Chamiso Hlatshwayo, acting GM Research, Brand South Africa, Mr. Roberto. Yes, that one. I'm glad you saw that I am trying to navigate my tongue around that pronunciation. Tsekuti, Head of Trade and Economics from the European Union Delegation in South Africa. Ms. Tembi Tlamini, Head of Africa China Banking, Business and Commercial Client Standard Bank, and Cosmos Mamhunze, Senior Country Representative for South Africa for Mozambique. So welcome. I'm going to give over to our panel, our facilitator, Mr. Solomon Engelbrecht. Please give our panelists a round of applause. Are we, And I look forward to this session and the sessions that have been covered already. What is clear from all of these sessions is that governments are gatekeepers, actually. You know, so the leaders, you know, there's a saying that John Maxwell always says it so well. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And governments are led by leaders. And leaders then ultimately decide what they allow in that particular country. They determine that political will. They are our enablers. You know, they either enable the enrichment of themselves or the enrichment of others. So with that introduction, I'll give over to Mr. Solomon. Please take it away, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. When they announced that probably there's another session going on the other side, I was a bit worried that bulk of the people will be leaving, but I'm happy that we still have some people, you know, in the room as well, so that we can have this discussion. You know, as I've been introduced, my name is Solomon Engelbrecht from the DTIC. You know, we've been tasked with the responsibility of expanding the exporter base on our side. As you know, that DTIC, it's a big family on its own. You know, our work predominantly then now has been designed to support, you know, the trade agreements that have been signed, you know, in different blocks of the world, to make sure that then we expand the exporter base. What we are lacking in South Africa, it's an issue of an export culture. You know, a number of our exporting companies are so limited. You know, please, let's not get to the actual numbers, but we know that we have so many SMMEs, so many good companies in South Africa. You know, with our interaction with the number of stakeholders, you know, ECDC as well can attest to that as well. It's because of that now, how do we sort of like make sure that our companies understand that exporting requires some knowledge, some skills, you know, the technical know-how. You know, how then now do we sort of like we make sure that they understand that the same agreements that have been signed, how does they get interpreted to them so that they understand what needs to be done in that kind of science. So that's one of the challenges. We must be proud, you know, especially from the Eastern Cape side, that this is a province of which it's so proud of itself in terms of the infrastructure to support exports. I mean, they spoke about it, you know, the ports as well, the roads as well. They're so good that interlink the country on its own. You know, program director referred to some of the goods that came from the Free State, you know, connected them so that then now can be shipped out from here, you know, and some of the activities. So we need to be proud of that. And our companies then, we shouldn't worry about such as well. Even our air freight as well is so good, you know, in almost all of our main provinces on that. But then the major focus is that how do we make sure that our companies themselves, you know, they understand what resources they require so that then now they understand that if I enter into exporting, then what do I sort of like need? There are a number of challenges, of course, that are a part of the process on its own. But we thought probably then now, as our point has been introduced, maybe then now we can start by sort of like tackling the issue of how does the agreements then make sense in that kind of sense. Yesterday, they spoke about the FCTA at length. You know, the doctor was here as well, also partially touched on the issue of AGOA as well. We know about that. But interestingly then now, from the Eastern Cape, you know, it's also been noted that, you know, part of the exports, you know, go to EU. And we agree that even from other provinces as well. And agro is a strong point of this province, and so is other provinces as such. So we have here Mr. Roberto Secuti, of which then we requested him, you know, then to outline some of the opportunities. How can we sort of like talk about the EU market? How can our companies then now benefit from that as well? So then now, I think then I will ask him probably then now to talk to that issue, and as we sort of like, we note some of the comments from our side so that then we can engage further in that regard. Allow me to give him the mic, Mr. Secuti. Oh, you got it. Okay.
I think it works. Yes, thank you very much, Solomon, and good morning to everybody. Happy to be here and happy to be particularly in such a nice province specifically. Maybe I would like to start. I'm heading the trade and economic section at the EU delegation in Pretoria, so the Embassy of the European Union. So I'm locally based. I have been here now for 4 years. And actually, I would like to start from the obvious, which I realize after 4 years is not really so obvious. Why are we talking, when it comes to trade, to the EU as one bloc, and not about the Germany, the France, and the 27 member states are composing this bloc? And maybe I just wanted to elaborate a bit more why we talk about EU specifically in trade terms. Because the EU is one single market. It's one single market based on a perfectly functioning customs union where there are 4 freedoms. Freedom of circulation of goods, people, capital and services. So in trade terms, it means you are still exporting to Germany, but the product going into Germany then is free to go to the all other 27 member states. This is why it makes sense to talk about EU in trade terms and EU as a bloc. And when you take the EU as a bloc, we are the #1 trading partner of South Africa. And this is the other thing, actually, I find that sometimes is misunderstood or not even put into highlight. Because if you take foreign direct investments in South Africa in terms of stocks, 49% of FDI stocks in South Africa are represented by European companies. And another misunderstanding or misperception, everybody thinks that Germany is #1. Nothing against German companies, of course, but the #1 foreign investor in South Africa are the Dutch. The Dutch represent 33% of foreign direct investment in South Africa in terms of stocks, followed by whom? By Belgium. Belgium, 77% of FDI in South Africa. Then Germany with 4%. In terms of trade, also we actually represent trade flows between the EU and South Africa represent 22%. So also #1 trading partner of South Africa. What does that mean, being #1? It comes with duties and responsibilities, of course. So the first thing is to make it possible that trade takes place and even increases. And there are many tools about that. Solomon, do you want me to go through already the key tools, or we want to have first a round of discussions? Very quickly, maybe. Very quickly. Tool #1 is a legal one, of course. We have an international agreement in place between the EU and the 5 SADC countries, 6 SADC countries, including South Africa, which is the Economic Partnership Agreement. We are in the 7th years of implementation of the EPA, the Economic Partnership Agreement, and this is a bilateral agreement. It's not a unilateral system of preference that can be withdrawn at any moment according to political considerations. It's an international, legally binding agreement, and you cannot suspend it very easily unilaterally. It has to be agreed, negotiated by both sides, by all parties of it, and hence the stability of it actually guarantees a certain level of predictability and certainty to business. Whatever has been granted under the Economic Partnership Agreement cannot be taken away at any moment. So that's an important consideration. Under the EPA, I think EPA has really been a success story because we have seen a terrible increase of trade flows from 2016 to 2023. And if I look at the 2024 figures, 22 figures, which are data which are the latest year available, South Africa had a trade surplus of 36 billion rand in 2022. Again, I hear a lot of discussion about trade deficits and trade surplus. I don't believe that a trade deficit as such is a bad thing, frankly, because in a world where we are talking about supply chains, global supply chains, regional supply chains, inputs are as important as exports. The important thing is the value addition that you have with these imports in the country in question. But with the European Union, South Africa has a positive trade surplus of 36 billion, out of which 4 are in agri-food products. Another important thing to say under the Economic Partnership Agreement, we discussed a lot, I heard a lot about over-dependence on export of raw material that are exported abroad, and then with the European Union, actually, the export basket diversification, it's much more diversified than any other export of South Africa towards the rest of the world. If you take the export basket toward the European Union, 41% is manufactured good, processed agricultural products, chemical and manufacturing goods. The rest of the world, when you look, is 30% represented by these goods. So much more diversified trade with the European Union. But again, so this is the statistics and the agreement, and this is tariffs. When we had a discussion yesterday about the ACFTA, we realized that tariffs is one part of the story. What about all the non-tariff barriers and all the rest? And this is where lays the challenge, actually, of taking up the opportunities, the untapped opportunities that there are in trade. So first of all, we have a market access database. If you Google, you find it very easily. It's one of the most widely used database because you can put the product you want to export to whatever country in the European Union by tariff code or by product description, and they will find immediately what is the tariff rate applicable, what are the rules of origin that apply, what are the standards, industrial standards, and what are the sanitary or phytosanitary requirements that need to be observed. You will find that in the database. So that is an absolutely important tool for export at our provincial level. Last year I was in Port Elizabeth in Rebecca, and we had actually a full presentation about that. Last year also in Rebecca, we presented a study that was done with the Northwest University in South Africa and the Trade Advisory Research based on what is called the DSM tool. Our friends from DTIC and others are using the DSM tool also. And the study was actually aimed at identifying what are the untapped export potentials of South Africa towards Europe in terms of markets, specific countries, and in terms of products. And the final results was 840 billion rand of untapped export potential. So it doesn't mean that these are export losses. No, these are benefits that can be seized if certain other conditions are met. And this is enormous. So for each province, actually the study identified what are the products that can be exported and what are the markets. Because one of the conclusions was also that exporters tend to focus on a few markets in Europe, like Germany, France, Netherlands, etc., and they forget actually that there are 27 member states. Some of them you're not exporting a lot, like Bulgaria, like the Baltic countries, and like Eastern countries, and this also present huge opportunities. But to do that, of course, you need to seize the opportunity. And here comes a bit the challenges and the obstacles. I believe that the key obstacle, of course, relies on the observance of what are the industrial standards that you need to observe, and the sanitary and the phytosanitary requirements. And that we like it or not, there is a clear trend in Europe dictated by consumers, because from food security, for instance, if you talk about agricultural products, we are moving into food safety. And we have a list of pests in place, and that we like it or not, we need to comply with the standards. But that means then we are making available under our official development assistance money that you can use in order to comply with the standards. Let me just mention a program, for instance. We have Alexander Toto, who's a program director. I don't know whether he's in this room, but we will speak at the next panel. We have a 20 million rand program with Dalrad about compliance with sanitary and phytosanitary standards, and also helping SMEs in the food sector in moving in this direction. We have another program of 120 billion rand supporting with the Department of Small Business, SMEs, in order to tap into this opportunity specifically for export. And then finally, and then I shut up, Solomon, it's 3 areas of policy priority on which we are working in South Africa, and this represents an enormous potential also for this province. One is the Just Energy Transition Partnership, JETP. You might have heard about the 8.5 billion US dollars that some donors have put on the table together with South Africa to support a just transition, energy transition that is just. And we are currently actually deploying and operationalizing this money. The European Investment Bank has 1 billion and half of it, of euro, and half of it, it wants to work with Transnet on green hydrogen and energy infrastructure in port and in logistics. And this is happening as we speak, and specifically at the port of Kucha, as we heard before. The other second area of priority is critical raw materials. We heard yesterday also in the automotive industry how much for lithium-based batteries you need to move into for electrical vehicles. We need a better use and better access and a better beneficiation of critical raw materials. And we are busy discussing with the government and with the different stakeholders how we can be better partnering on this, not to export raw materials from South Africa to Europe, but actually to find win-win partnerships where there is also local beneficiation and the transformation and refining of these minerals to do that. And third, the key strategic policy priorities we are busy is on strategic corridors. Strategic corridors we have identified in the framework of the CFTA also. 11 strategic corridors are important in Africa, specifically for value chains also with Europe. And in South Africa specifically, there is a work going on the strategic corridor linking Lubumbashi to the port of Durban and linking Walvis Bay to the port of Maputo. So a lot is going on. I'm happy to elaborate, but these are the policy priorities at this stage here. Thank you, Solomon.
What a wealth of knowledge, interpretation of a EU policy, better explained, as if you would ask me from the government perspective, probably then I would have referred to the, government language. But this is what the business want to hear. The issue of tools, I think that most people in the room will be interested into that. There is a program of which then we're doing with GIZ, I must mention, exposing South African companies, to the German market, if I may say. And one of the challenges is that then now the issues of standard. How do you get the product being certified? So, Mr. Sekuti, I think then probably then we're going to prolong this discussion after this, to see how best the Eastern Cape companies can benefit in that sort of, even from our side, from GTI side, then the rest of the country then can benefit into it because of our objective is really to make sure that we grow our export of the country. If we can grow the export of the country, then now, that means then now we can create more jobs and make sure that the problem that we're faced with is basically being resolved. Another part of the world of which then now is playing such a critical role, and which I'm glad here we have Mr. Cosmas, of which then specialize predominantly then of, about the US aid. It's one of the programs of which I think if then we can pay much interest on it, can actually then assist our exporters then to penetrate that part of the market as well. We thought probably that now, by him being invited to be here, he can also talk about that as well and other opportunities in that part of the world of the US market. Thank you very much. Say, can I?
Thank you, Dr. Solomon. And thanks to ECDC for the invitation to participate in this event. So my name is Cosmas Munze. I'm with USAID Africa Trade Investment Program. It's USAID is a flagship continent-wide program that covers Southern, Eastern, Western, and North Africa. A 5-year project which is 570 million dollars value in terms of support budget that has been allocated for the project. So I am more on the southern side of the project, covering 10 countries in Southern Africa, including South Africa. And our involvement is hinged on two key objectives. So, supporting exports, the first objective being supporting exports from 9 of the 10 countries into South Africa. Of course, someone would ask why supporting exports to South Africa. Of course, what we have realized is that there is a gap in terms of ingredients. The region can supply ingredients to South Africa, and then they are further processed for exports, number one. Number two, South Africa's capacity in terms of consolidating from the region, consolidating and then pushing exports across to the US and other markets as well. So that's the role that South Africa plays. So, and then the second objective is to do with promoting exports from the 10 countries to the United States and capitalizing on the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is AGOA. As you are aware that AGOA has been around for 2 decades and is due to expire September 2025. So we supporting firms and countries to take advantage of that facility to reach to the US market. So maybe I can just expand a bit on AGOA itself. So it allows for 6,800 thereabout tariff lines, duty-free and largely quota-free access to the United States. So what does it do? So it's allowing products from this region to be competitive when they land onto the US market because duty is waived. So it makes us more competitive on the US market. And looking at the sub-Saharan Africa, because AGOA is targeted at sub-Saharan Africa. So about 35 countries right now are benefiting from AGOA, including South Africa as one of the beneficiaries. Looking at 2022 statistics, as an example, of the 30 billion that has been exported to the US from these AGOA-eligible countries, about 10.3 billion, which is about 34%, went into the United States under AGOA. So, which shows that it's very significant. And if we are to narrow it down to South Africa, of the 14 billion that was exported to the United States last year, 2022, about 3.62 billion, which is about 25%, went into the United States duty-free, which shows some kind of significant AGOA utilization. In South Africa, I mean, we have been noticing some kind of growth in terms of AGOA utilization by South Africa itself. And for example, 2020, South Africa exported to the US under AGOA about 1.8 billion, and that increased to about 2.6 billion in 2021. And last year, that was around 3.6 billion. So it's significant. It's not small figures by any imagination. Of course, we can do better, I mean, as a country, as a region, and as a continent in terms of sub-Saharan Africa, in terms of utilization of this facility that is available. So having said that, so what is our role? Why are we here? Why is the project around the USAID Africa Trade Investment? We've got a role to play. What we are encouraging firms is, even if we are saying AGOA is ending 2025, you must have your foot in the market. You must create those partnerships. Business will continue whether there is AGOA or no AGOA. AGOA is just a door opener or a sweetener, if you want to put it that way. So how do we facilitate exports? So we are largely a partnership-based model. We have evolved AGOA. I mean, Africa Trade Investment Hub, I would say it's a 4th generation of USAID's or US government's support to sub-Saharan Africa. Since the inception of AGOA in the year 2000, there have been some trade hubs in the 3 regions, Southern, Western, and Eastern Africa. But this has evolved now. It's now running under the Africa Trade Investment model. And this model largely focuses or supports market systems development approach, where instead of us taking a lead, we are working with partners. We rely on partnerships, us taking a supportive role, and partners, allowing partners to lead, allowing partners to scale, and in the process creating sustainability, because we are a project, we are not here to stay forever. It's, this current project ends in 2026, so what happens after we are gone? So that's what we are creating, that sustainability aspect, so that companies, partners can continue to do business even in our absence. So what do? We partner. In this case, we partner with ECDC. They've been a great partner of ours, and we've supported firms jointly, I mean, with the ECDC. We have done some even activities with the Nelson Mandela Business Chamber. We have also done, I think, some work with the Border K. So those are the key partners, and then we reach out to the beneficiaries, which are the companies. Because when we talk of a program such as AGOA, it's not meant for government, it's not meant for the likes of ECDC, it's meant for the firms. Those are the beneficiaries, those are the ones who should take actually ownership in terms of how utilization is managed. Right. We also do trade promotion, and under that there are a number of activities under that, but I would mention one of the flagship trade promotion activity that we have managed since 2017, which is the Summer Fans Food Show. It's a food-based show in the United States, and we have taken 52 firms since 2017 to last year, 52 firms from the region to exhibit at the Summer Fans Food Show. And of those, 38 have reported exports. We have expended about 1.1 million on a cost-sharing basis. US had done about 700,000 in terms of support, and firms and partners have put in about 400,000, 1.1 million expended. But what has been the return on investment? So firms have reported up to end of last year, or financial year, about $176 million generated in exports to the United States. So there's massive kind of return on investment based due to that kind of collaboration. And so it was largely on Southern Africa. Because of this kind of success, it's now being reiterated. Now we are roping in other regions under the continental project. So come 2024, we are planning to have a continent-wide. We are going to be a partner continent if all the necessary approvals are secured. Partner continent on the Summer Fans Food Show. We're targeting 100 to 150 or even 200 companies from the region to exhibit at the Summer Fans Food Show in the United States. I'm not going to touch on all the support that we provide, but there's been mention of challenges to do with market access or meeting market end requirements. The project has been supporting firms on a cost-sharing basis. If one wants to enter the United States, one of the critical issues is to meet with FDA requirements, is to meet with certification requirements. So what we have done as a project is to cost share 60-40, but now we're moving away, like we said, we're moving on to market systems development. So we are not going to take a key role into that, but what we have done is to open avenues where exporters, partners know where to go. If they want FDA support, they know who can provide that kind of support. If they want certification, they know where to go. So we have done our part in terms of that, but now we are continuing to support in terms of creating those kind of linkages. So let me also mention a tool that we have, that we have established. It's a matching grant mechanism, which covers projects that are between 100,000 to 500,000 US dollars, $100,000 to $500,000 on a cost-sharing basis. But obviously the projects have to speak to two objectives: exports to South Africa and or exports to the United States. So if someone has got a project, innovative project, creative project, as long as they are able to put on the table half the amount that they are seeking for, at least half the amount that they are seeking for, we are here to support 50-50. As long as you give us export figures, we are happy to collaborate with you. So those are some of the initiatives. I just summarized. Those are some of the initiatives. But I mean, obviously, it's not a bed of roses exporting to the United States. It's not all a walk in the park. There are challenges. And obviously, some of our interventions have been meant to address those kind of challenges. So we have just been our financial year is up to September. So we are working on next year's work plan. We have started the process. But what we've discovered as key challenges, obviously, it's you want to export. How do you identify the buyers? I think those are questions that most exporters, how can I identify the right buyer for my product? Obviously, those are things that we discuss with the likes of ECDC. How do we participate in which programs, which activities? That's number one. Market access, meeting market access, market entry requirements, the certifications and all. Those are some of the challenges. And also looking at capacity. Some firms do not have capacity to produce the volumes that are required for the US market. Obviously, there are discussions and guidance in terms of how do you do it. Do you want to go the volume size, or you want to go the niche route? Those are some of the challenges. Also, it's one thing to list with a retailer in the United States, for example, listing with Whole Foods as an example. That's not the end of the game. You still need to support, to create awareness that your product is with one of the retailers in the US. I'm told I've got 1 minute, so I'll just quickly rush to the opportunities, because it's of no point to talk about the activities and the support, but without touching on the opportunities. Where do opportunities lie in the United States? I think what's trending is, for example, plant-based products, plant-based foods. The US market itself, the market size for plant-based is estimated as around 8 billion as we speak, and globally around 35 billion. And it's expected to grow in the next 10 years to around 162 billion in terms of market plant-based products. Where are the other opportunities? Organic, natural. Where are the other opportunities? We have been focusing largely on agro-based, but now we are expanding to cover other sectors that are non-ag, leather and footwear, cosmetics, and others. I think I can stop here, but I think we can always discuss post this session. Thank you.
Now, we can note the passion, of course, from your side, which you respect. You know, I'm looking at the program director, and I've noted that she's very, very strict in terms of time. So I'm trying to respect her as well, and everybody here. But we have a liberty of engaging with the panel, you know, after this, the session as well. Now, without even myself, you know, probably then prolonging my speech, allow me to also then to introduce Ms. Hlatshwayo as well from the Brand SA as well. When we have our own conversation, ma'am, you're not part of us. You know, I wouldn't really want to put you on the spot, but we wanted to probably then to give you the platform, you know, from the Brand SA, you know, to relate your services, how best your service can assist our companies, because the issue is about what kind of resources then now can be made available to the manufacturers and the service providers that can be exported to different parts of the market. And certainly, we are part of the broader value chain, because of the belief is that South African government do have institutions that can be properly aligned to assist our companies from government and from the private sector. And Brand SA is part of that on its own. I tried to be as broad as possible, madam.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for saying that, and I think we need to be very clear in understanding what Brand South Africa's mandate is. Yes, we fall within the investment promotion fold. We work quite closely with yourselves as DTIC. And what we do is that our contribution to the investment promotion fold within the South African context is that we primarily work in terms of image promotion. That is primarily what we do. And how does that stand to benefit South African firms that are obviously looking to tap into export markets, is that we need to curate a message about South Africa and South Africa's export capabilities. If international markets don't understand what South Africa has to offer, what are our niche markets, what export capabilities do we have, they are unlikely to want to engage with South African exporters. And just like my colleague from the EU said, they have a long-standing relationship with South Africa. And even within that, in order for them to expand the interests of the additional 27 countries that don't necessarily have an existing export relationship with South Africa, Brand South Africa would be quite integral in that, because then we would assist you in curating a particular narrative that showcases what South Africa has to offer. And as you would know, that the only way that a country will take direct investment interest in your country is if they not only know you, but if they can trust you. And if they have an awareness of your capabilities as a country. And one of the blind spots that we've discovered, obviously, as an image promotion agency, is that we are not good at telling our stories. And had my colleague from the EU not delved into the export potential, and just in terms of the untapped sectors within the country, we wouldn't know that. And that is the type of information that we need to put together, in terms of our investment promotion agencies at a provincial as well as national level. We need to be able to have information repositories that we're able to share with important investors, such as our partners at the EU, or our partners in the US, or as well as our other partners that we're trying to, obviously, the relationships that we're trying to build throughout the continent. And that's very important. And I know that it's not the easiest thing to do, because we tend to find ourselves, isolated and very sector specific. However, at the end of the day, when we market South Africa as a whole. And therefore, that's why it's important that sectors understand themselves and are able to interact with ourselves and understand what we do. And then we are able to build a bridge in terms of curating a message that creates the interest and that eventually then translates into an investment decision. And one of the most effective tools or platforms that we've seen in terms of image promotion has been the SA Investment Conference, for instance. When that started 5 years ago, the president set a very ambitious target. But his belief and creating a platform that was meant to bridge the gap between business and government, but more importantly, create a narrative that South Africa is open for business, and that South Africa is a country that is here to support businesses that are looking to invest in the country. And as a result of that, we exceeded our target by 30%, where in the last conference, we raised over 1.7 trillion rand in investment across a number of sectors. Now, you can imagine if we continue on the trajectory, and we continue to engage with partners across the board, how much more we can raise. In fact, that 800 billion in terms of potential investment potential in the country, I believe we can reach that mark in the next 5 years. We just need to be deliberate with our intentions and continue to collaborate across the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. It's well said. I think probably then your role that you play, in the space on its own really then now it is to assist companies so that they can be known because of putting South Africa actually then has grown to be a brand into the African market. Now, as then now the country is prioritizing the FCTA, then now you'll be there to support our companies and say, we're here, South Africa, and these companies, the companies of which they now have been branded, and accordingly so, by South Africa as such. Now, of course, it has been mentioned that then as export on its own got its own challenges. It's not all rosy and rosy as such. Now, there is a good work I've noted that has been done by Mr. Corbyn and his company with ECDC, and really directly working with companies from the Eastern Cape. And then the attestation that I heard yesterday, it was overwhelming. But over and above, I think probably then now, throughout the journey then, it's quite important. We thought probably, let's allow him as well to mention some of the challenges that they've shared, with these companies, and then how best then those challenges can be resolved as such, because of going outside South African market, you're on your own. It's not a matter of just selling one bread over the counter and then you get them a quick money and so forth. So based on experience, Mr. Thompson, allow me to give you the opportunity to talk about those challenges so that the companies can be realistic about exporting as well.
Thank you, Solomon. And thank you to ECDC for inviting me. Firstly, let me say, if I look nervous, I absolutely am. Okay. But that aside, my name is Corbin Thompson. I'm the head of projects for the International Trade Institute of Southern Africa. Many of you will know us simply as ATRISA. We're a trade training, trade consultancy, and trade promotion organization that's been operating for a little over 27 years now. Okay. We run the only internationally accredited 3-year diploma in international trade management in Africa. I've seen a number of our graduates here as well as one actually on the stage with us in the form of Cos. However, my role in the business is largely focused on projects and initiatives that boost economic growth and the competitiveness of our exporters on the continent. One of the programs that you may be familiar with is the digital TFSA School of Export that was produced in conjunction with the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office. It offers on-demand training and information on all things international trade. And we've actually reached a milestone recently of over 3,000 users on the platform across Southern Africa. It's a milestone that we're incredibly proud of. In addition to that, we are actively engaging with a South African bank on the development of a 2-year exporter accelerator program focused on medium-sized exporters that are currently exporting but facing some of the growth challenges that have been mentioned here today. Really, the challenges that South African exporters face can largely be broken down into 3 components. It's access to skills, access to markets, and access to funding. Where access to skills is concerned, what we found is that there is still significant skills gaps that exist in international marketing as well as international finance. For example, very few exporters conduct market segmentation, all right? And like Cos and Roberto mentioned, the European Union and the US, it's 27 countries in the European Union. The US is 50 states that operate as 50 different countries. So you have to take market segmentation seriously. Where international finance is concerned, a lot of our exporters simply don't know about the mechanisms and commercial tools that are available to mitigate against things like international financial risk. And I think we could do a better job, both as private sector and commercial lenders and commercial financial institutions, about communicating that value proposition. Where access to markets is concerned, it's by far the biggest challenge faced by our exporters is access to in-market assistance. All right, and by in-market assistance, I mean direction in terms of who to speak to. All right, market information on things like buying habits. You know, to give you an example, Australia has, well, Wines of Australia has 8 full-time employees based in the US that are actively knocking on doors and driving sales growth for the Australian wine sector. South African wine sector just doesn't have those sort of resources. So we have to adopt innovative ways that allow us to compete with more developed countries that are ultimately our competitors in the international market. Where access to funding is concerned, there is challenges across OPEX, CAPEX, as well as working capital. But the challenges regarding working capital seem to be far more acute. And what I mean by that is because of the long lead times inherent in international trade, and possibly the perception of dealing with Africa, we tend to get in situations where we're waiting 90 to 180 days for payment. And during that time, you have to manage your cash flow. What? I know that all of that sounds very doom and gloom, but there is solutions and there is initiatives that are trying to address these challenges. Things like the TFSA School of Export provide that on-demand assistance for international marketing and international financial skills. And where access to markets is concerned, we're now having a larger push towards innovative ways of providing access to markets. For example, in the face of a depreciating rand, it may make sense to do more inward buying missions. Let's fly the buyers out. Let's show them South Africa has fantastic infrastructure, fantastic exporters and facilities. You know, we're not riding lions to work, okay? Where access to funding is concerned, I think that there is more being done in terms of providing accessible tools to exporters, right? I think having the likes of banks on sessions like this, having breakaway rooms to communicate the value proposition of commercial lending is fantastic, and we need to do more of that. In a South African context, there also is untapped capital pools that are now being explored for exporters. For example, ESD funding, all right, to drive transformation could also be used to drive capacity growth in exporters in South Africa, making them more competitive. Maybe I'm a naive optimist, but I truly think that there's a change taking place in the ecosystem for export support in South Africa. We're having more organizations talking to each other, sharing resources, and collaborating on what essentially is the main goal, more exports from our shores. For example, we met yesterday, a few of the panelists here, to just have a quick conversation and align on today's talk. And within 15 minutes, we already identified 3 or 4 different opportunities to collaborate and support our individual mandates. So again, I want to say thank you to ECDC for bringing us together and allowing us to collaborate and drive the growth of South Africa's export sector. Thank you.
No, say you were not nervous. You're just passionate about what you're doing. That's what happened. You know, from the 3 key points that you identified, and certainly then I would like to agree with you. You know, in order then to support the mandate of growing the exporter base so that you can actually grow the actual exports that will bring revenue to the country, we do need skillful companies in a sense that they understand the value chain of export. And then access to market on its own, it can only happen if these companies, they know what they want to do. Because of if they are adequately skilled, they will have a plan why I'm going to that market, not because of ECDCs invited them to participate in a particular mission. Because of that now, the narrative should be that it shouldn't be about what government is saying, but it should be about, no, this is what my plan is saying in terms of exporting. If then my plan says I need to do business in China, this is what my plan says. please invite me when you go to China, not when you go to Nigeria, because I'll be going there for the sake of going. Now, again, you touch on the issue of finance on its own, and then realistically so. That's one of the fundamental points, and then that's affecting most of our companies. But what led that we have Umam Dlamini, not to put you on a spot, madam, we had a chat yesterday, but from the bank side, I think we have capable companies that if they are well supported, I think then they can actually assist the country to grow the export, of which that's the ultimate mandate, especially from the Eastern Cape.
Great. Good morning, and thank you very much to ECDC for this invite. My name is Tembi Dlamini. I head up Africa-China Banking and Trade at Standard Bank South Africa. At Standard Bank, we lead with the purpose that Africa is our home and we drive her growth. And I think we're very well placed to do that, given that we are the largest bank in Africa by assets and revenue. But not only that, we're also present in 20 African markets, and which enables us to empower our clients to be able to grow the expansion into the African markets and do trade into the African markets. We are the only bank that is part of the Trade Alliance, which involves about 16 international banks worldwide, and it is a platform that has about 20,000 clients from those banks that are able to interact on a B2B basis in terms of selling and exporting into various markets that they would be looking into. And we are the only bank, the African bank, that is on that platform. Over and above that, through our partnership with ICBC, which is the Industrial Commercial Bank of China, we are strategically placed to enable our clients to go into the Chinese market. How we do that, we leverage the extension through ICBC once more to give clients our tools and capabilities to enter a dynamic market such as China. One of our colleagues touched on the importance of market access, but being able to actually operate within the market then becomes a different challenge altogether. And through the tools that we've put together, the Africa-China trade tools, we actually allow our clients to de-risk market entry into China through various activities that we would be involving our clients in. I think one of the important things is obviously information when you enter into a certain market. Standard Bank in 2022 launched the Trade Barometer, as mentioned, as Africa's largest bank, that we are in 20 regions. It gives us unparalleled expertise and knowledge and footprint of those markets. So within this Trade Barometer, we put together research which we actually update within a 2-year period. It's accessible on our website if you're interested in understanding the various market risks, the FX challenges, as well as the financial layout of whichever market you would go into. That would be a great tool then that you would access. I touched on our ability to help our clients enter into the Chinese market. We just got back from the China-Africa Economic Trade Expo, where we were able to actually take about 60 of our clients. We had a stand at the expo, and we were showcasing African products from coffee, wines. We collaborated with Westgrow as well as the Wines Association of South Africa to grow and educate the Chinese market around wine exports from South Africa. And I'm happy to also report that we've actually, within a month, have had an export success from that visit. So through the initiatives that we are driving, we're trying to de-risk as a bank. We touched on the financial capacity, that exporting is quite a challenging journey that any business would go into. The challenges obviously is the working capital that you would have that would enable you to export outside of your normal business operations and your normal business working capital loans that you would have, you need funds that would actually facilitate then the trade, and that is where our trade finance tools and products would then come in. One other key that is quite critical, is, especially for exporters, is the ability to make payments. We find that that comes with the trust aspect of it. You know, you have a buyer that is sitting in China, and they are asking you to send your goods, and you're like, no, but pay me first. And they're like, but how do I know that your container is going to land with what I've ordered? And you know, you have to have a certain platform of trust that you can actually engage. And I think the relationship that we have with ICBC through Standard Bank, we're able to utilize our trade tools to facilitate then that trust aspect of being able to pay on the other side as a South African exporter. But also when you are also waiting for those funds to come through, that is when you engage with your bank and you rely on the tools that your bank would have. I'll leave it there. I think we'll expand further as we get into the discussion.
No. Of course, you know, even when the Minister of Finance speaks, you know, we all listen, you know, hence the round of applause. Thank you very much for that. Now, thank you very much, Ms. Lamini. I think it is well said, and then obviously then from the private sector, you know, what she was basically highlighting that the bank is available, you know, to do business. Of course, they're in business, and enable our companies then now to practically export their product to the, she spoke about the Chinese market, but I would like to believe that whatever market, the bank will listen, as long as then you comply with the standards. Now, without wasting time, I think if you allow Product Director, maybe we still have some minutes to take some questions. Maybe we can allow questions from the floor. Probably then now we can limit it to 3, I don't know. Just to hear from you, and then let the panelists respond to that. We have the first question here. Here's the first question here.
Ciao, signor Chikuti. Come sta oggi?
Bene, bene, molto bene.
Mi chiamo Osi. Piacere di conoscerti. You know, Signor Chikuti, you know what's happening is that as much as you say there's $840 billion worth of export from Africa into Europe, but then if you look at the European standards, especially when it comes to food, they are extreme. For instance, if you're exporting to any other country, you'll find that there's 12 general documents that you're supposed to have: your commercial invoice, your bill of lading, your certificate of origin, your export license, your export permit. But then when it comes to Europe, there are stringent measures when it comes to them exporting food. You've got your I think it's a phytosanitary certificate, and you've got your certificates of analysis. Now, with all these stringent requirements that Europe has, you'll find that it's almost as if these red tapes are there for them not to import finished products from Africa. It's almost as if what you guys want from Africa is, if it's an orange, it has to be a raw material. It has to, if it's an apple, it has to be an apple. It can't be apple juice. Do you get what I'm saying? For instance, we can't export biltong to Europe because of the standards that you guys have, and biltong is amazing. You know, we can't export chutney into Europe because there's a certain content of vinegar that it has to have. So you'll find that there's these red tapes that don't allow for us to export into Europe. So it's just a comment that I wanted to put out so that people have an understanding of why there's so much untapped potential. It's because of all these red tapes and all these documents that you need in order to export into the European Union. Thank you, Signor Chikuti. Grazie.
It looks like the message was quite clear because we only have one question in the room. Oh, there is another one at the back. Oh, the mic is coming then.
Thank you very much. Thank you, moderator, and I would like to thank the panelists. My name is Malaku Desta. I work at the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and I really enjoyed this panel, I have to say. My comment or my questions also go to Mr. Chakuti. You eloquently expressed the EU policy towards Africa in many of the areas. I would even go further where I am at the UNECA. Using generous support given to us by the European Commission, we were able to support the development of national AF safety implementation strategies in over 30 countries. The support provided by the EU is very well recognized across the continent, I have to say. But then you also talked about the economic partnership agreements. I just wanted you to comment on that further, because when it comes to the economic partnership agreements, the EU, I believe, is setting a very, very bad example for the whole continent, for the rest of the world, and a very damaging thing for the continent because of the impact the EPS are having in derailing Africa's internal integration program. Initially, we had the Lomé-Cotonou arrangement in which all sub-Saharan Africa was treated as one. Now, because of the EPS, we have taken that into the 4 sub-regions of Africa. Initially, many of us were saying, the artificial distinction between Northern Africa, Mediterranean Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa was wrong, because at the FCFTA level, we talk about Africa as one, while the EU treats Africa as 2. There is one policy for trade policy as well for Mediterranean Africa. There is another for Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, there is a distinction between developing African countries and LDCs, because LDCs benefit from everything but arms. They don't want to sign any of the EPS. And now Africa is getting even more fragmented because of those incentives. And when we're talking, and our colleague here was talking about AGOA, when we started engaging the American government on post-AGOA after 2025, saying, AGOA should be extended, they are telling us, no, you cannot ask us to extend a unilateral preference while giving a reciprocal preference to the European Union. So that's what I mean when I say it is setting a very damaging precedent for Africa's engagements with the rest of the world, with the other developed countries, including the US. So what would be there is that incoherence between the EU's development policy, which we all welcome, and that damaging impact that your trade policy has. It is that policy incoherence that really bothers many of us on this part of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we take one last question? Is there? There's a question here in front, on the second row.
Thank you very much. My name is Tabeka, representing farmers, AFASA. To the lady, to the finance lady, I just want to find out, we have an export deal, and China, you are a preferred bank to work with China. Do you finance a group of, like for instance, as AFASA, we represent farmers, and obviously in the individual capacities might not be able to meet the requirements that you might have as a bank. Would you consider financing an association of farmers? Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you. Probably then now, Mr. Sekuti, it looks like, wow, you occupied a spot, especially with the first 2 questions. And with the second question, probably then now, there was a touch on AGOA. Probably then now, Mr. Kosma then maybe can add on that as well.
No, thank you very much. And all the questions that have been asked are actually very, very important. And the debate, of course, has been a long-standing debate, and we still need to get a lot to debate about this. Very quickly, for the time that is allowed, I would start actually from the question on the ACFTA process. A trade economic integration process at continental level, and to what extent actually the economic partnership agreements and the association agreements that European Union have with the Northern Africa are actually fragmenting rather than supporting that continental process. Well, I would say that the starting point of it, the ACFTA as such, is based on regional economic communities. This is one of the main principles which is embedded in the ACFTA treaties. So RECs have been recognized by the ACFTA as the building blocks of the integration process at continental level. And in fact, if you look actually at the market access offers that are made in the framework of the CFTA, these are made between the SACU, for instance, and ECOWAS, between SACU and Egypt, or with COMESA or other regional integration. So the ACFTA as such is not a uniform also set of rules with the same market access for all countries. It is based also on market access based on regional economic communities. So there is already a trend which is going on at continental level, which has been decided to be supported as building blocks. Now, the EPAs, most of them, the negotiations, the agreements that Europe has with Africa is based, or at least that was the original intention, to have it with the regional economic communities. The geographical configuration, in fact, then changed, but that is not because we want it. It's because if you take SADC, of course, we would have liked to have an EPA with the whole SADC region, but many SADC countries didn't want an EPA, and they disagreed. And if you take even within the SADC, the likes like Mauritius and Zimbabwe decided not to negotiate together with South Africa, or the other way around, and it was an ESA group that negotiated the EPA with the European Union. So that led certainly to a certain degree of fragmentation, but which was beyond our intention, and it was dictated by our parties with whom we were negotiating as sovereign nations. Of course, we're all looking for coherence, but we're also looking for mutually supporting the processes. I can tell you, and this is without hesitation, that the final vision of Europe is one day having one FTA between European Union, and the whole African continent. That is certainly the final vision. But to reach that vision, you understand that there is still a lot of path to undergo, and mainly also more integration within the African continent and integration amongst the African regional economic communities in Africa. So that is a fact we have to do. At the same time, I see beneficial effect in this because we see that the kind of negotiation skills that were gained when Cameroon, when ECOWAS, when Kenya, and all the others were negotiating with the EU are now being put into fruition in the framework of the CFTA negotiations. So actually, I think the EPAs contributed to that. And on the other side, EPAs are trade agreements between Europe and some parts of Africa. It doesn't mean that they are disintegrated, the integration within Africa. This is a trend going on, and we are supporting it. And as I said, we are looking forward one day to have one FTA with the whole continent. That's one of the questions. I didn't answer to all your questions, but I think the core was this. Now, the gentleman who's very fluent in Italian, and you have been also very, very elaborate in many questions. I heard many questions you asked in these 2 days, and all very interesting. SPS requirements, red tape or not? Well, we can agree to disagree whether you can see that as a red tape. What I can say is that in Europe, we have an increasing demand by our consumers to respect food safety. To respect food safety, and at the same time now there is also a very important trend going on in terms of climate change and fight of climate change. The same type of discussion we are having on SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary, are taking place for everybody knows maybe in this room, the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism that we are implementing in Europe, because we would like to go in a certain direction for climate considerations. The fact is that, and this is not without arrogance that I'm saying it really as a matter of fact, is that since our food safety standards are dictated by a consumer demand and as such, we are not willing to actually give in. This is too important for our consumers, hence there is an amount of requirements that we need to respect. At the same time, are there really a red tape? I see that actually it is an obstacle and we need to work a lot more. But South Africa has a surplus in agri-food products of 4 billion rand. 4 billion rand out of the 36 surplus it has with Europe. So it seems to me that in any event, trade is still taking place. And if you take, Justin Chadwick is in the room, and I'm sure we can have a lot of debate, even citrus, which is the most concerned product now in terms of SPS consideration, trade still takes place. And if you take past season, it still actually had almost the same amounts of the previous years. Whether this is right or wrong, we can agree to disagree, but actually this is our legislators, together with our member states, have taken certain decisions. Hence, the standards are high, and by the way, other countries in the world are looking at the standards of Europe for the same requirements. And a lot of things, if you take many other regional blocks, they adopt exactly the same, in the same way. But trade with Europe is more in terms of volume and values, hence it becomes more important. But other countries have exactly the same standards, specifically on certain products. But again, it is, I wouldn't say an obstacle, it is a challenge, but this is a challenge we need to work together on, because it's not that we want to put that in order to discourage. If that was a reason, you wouldn't have a trade surplus in agri-food products. But you could have more trade even if we overcome this challenge. And this is why we have to make best use of the official development assistance that is there. DALRAD, and there are many DALRAD representatives, is managing also programs on this. And I see that a lot of things could be also done at provincial level, much more. Thank you.
I think I see our MC is already standing. Like, can we maybe discuss it offline? Because your question was very broad. Agriculture is a core focus for the bank, particularly for us for exporting. We focus predominantly on agri-produce, but yes, as mentioned, your question was quite broad. I'd have to understand the details. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Thank you for the question. So my response is within the confines of the project. Noted because it's a policy question, so it's above my pay grade. But suffice to say that AGOA post-2025 is topical. Governments on either side are seized with the discussions in terms of what are we going to deal with post-2025? What kind of animal, what kind of beast are we going to be dealing with? So, and also with the understanding that there's an AGOA forum that is scheduled in the next 2-3 months. So I think those questions, policy questions, will be discussed as well. Thank you.
Allow me to thank the panel, not for me to make further comments, otherwise I'll be taller than my height. Thank you very much, the panelists, for the time, and thank you very much to everyone. Let me hand over to the program director.
Thank you so much. Wonderful panel. Very interesting discussions. Thank you, facilitator, as well, Mr. Solomon, for taking us through that session so beautifully. What is very clear is collaboration is key. You know, I think we are in such an opportune time at this current moment, you know, and And that is it, taking all our contacts that we've made here and turning those contacts into actual contracts. You know, we've heard, who has heard the word million? We're not talking millions here today, we're talking billions and trillions. And I think it's up to us as leaders in this room, how do we take, because when we talk billions and trillions, and we drive through our neighborhoods, those billions and those trillions is far removed from that. So how do we as leaders create those opportunities? What is the real underlying purpose of this? Is growth, creating opportunities for others. And we really have to ensure that we move from action, you know, from taking one another's business cards and going back and seeing how do we create the opportunity for the person in the squatter camp who is so far removed from that billion. How do we create job opportunities in a province with such a high unemployment rate? So with those closing remarks, we will break for tea until 12 o'clock. And what I just want to highlight, you'll see on your program, simultaneously, the International Banking Finance Workshop is ending off now at 11:30 as well. And then you'll see when you turn the page, it says 2:15 to 3. There's the third workshop on export legalities and processes, avoiding costs and delays. So please make a note that that is changing 12 to 1:45. That is changing. So we're going to break for tea and the exhibition downstairs. Please go visit our exhibitors, and we're going to regroup. And so after, when the tea ends at 12 o'clock, there's the 2 breakaway sessions. You'll see when you walk towards the tea downstairs. The first breakaway is renewable energy, and then the second one talks on stimulating agricultural and food exports. After those 2 sessions, so that's from 12 to 1:30. At 1:30, we're going to all come back here into this hall for the closing remarks by our CEO of the Eastern Cape Development Corporation, Mr. Wakaba. So please do enjoy your tea, but before you do, please give our panelists another round of applause and connect. Thank you.